Punk has been like one of the best kept secrets in the world, and we sort of went around and blabbed to everybody about it. So.
Welcome to paradise.
From snotty school kids to the undisputed multi-platinum selling worldwide masters of punk pop, the story of the Green Day phenomenon is the journey of a hard-working East Bay band dedicated to their craft, creating chaos and wading through endless tubs of hair dye along the way.
There's so many bands that make it and have long careers that I think are bad, that to explain why one that I think is good made it, I really don't have an explanation for.
I think the reason why they're so successful is because they're so damn serious about their business.
For Green Day, the time's right. People looking for a band that sounded like that. They had the money and the promotion to make sure everyone knew it was there, and it sold.
And it was Green Day who really were the first band to kind of go so huge that they opened the floodgates for a lot of other bands.
And the kind of success they got was bigger than they could ever imagine.
He's the guy you could imagine having a drink with, but also he's a rock god, he's a punk rock star, he really is.
I just knew that I had gotten into something far bigger than I'd ever imagined before, and that nothing was going to be the same again anymore.
Hey, we are the best. We are the best, but you know, hey, we don't want to go floating, and you know, some things are best unsaid.
This is the colorful story of Green Day. It all started way back in '87 in the stifling, bleak refinery town of Rodeo, California. 15 miles north of Berkeley, when two 11-year-old friends, Billy Joe Armstrong and Mike Pritchard, met one day in the school canteen. Billy was the youngest of 6 children, his mother a waitress in a local diner, while Mike had been born to a heroin-addicted mother and adopted at a young age. Finding they shared a similar sense of humor and an interest in music, the pair became inseparable, spending endless hours listening to records borrowed from Billy's older siblings. Soon they began jamming together, Billy Joe on a guitar bought for him by his father, and Mike, now going by the name of Mike Dirnt, on bass. The two friends had been playing their songs at home for a couple of years, when in 1987, they decided to recruit a drummer for their garage band. His name was John Kiffmeyer, but everyone knew him as Al Sobrante. Together, the 3 teens became Sweet Children, a tongue-in-cheek moniker lifted from their song of the same name.
They call themselves the Sweet Children because people would patronize them and call them Sweet Children.
Maybe it was like to preempt any criticism they would get at shows, because you know, young bands get given quite a hard time. Older punks will be thinking, you know, who are these young upstarts? So it's probably tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic choice of name, really.
In the earliest days of Sweet Children, the trio began hanging around the recently opened all-ages punk rock venue, 924 Gilman Street in the East Bay. The Gilman scene was a place where young punk fans could hang out and form bands, start record labels, or fanzines. A close-knit community that prided itself on its punk ethics.
A whole bunch of us built it from scratch. You know, like took jackhammers to the floor and busted it up and put it in the toilets. Built the stage, put in the wiring. I almost electrocuted myself doing that, and started putting on shows. And it flourished. It was amazing. One of those miracles that actually happens, and it's still going today, like 19 years later.
A lot of people felt like there was all this local talent that didn't have any place to play. And by having this place suddenly that people were able to create, a lot of people came out of the woodwork. A lot of people that had been around were able to focus on that. And it had, and still has, a kind of a unifying effect. You know, people have affection for the place.
The Gilman Street was great because there's a sense of community. There wasn't like you'd be based over in England and there'd be no community at all. There was a strong punk rock community. Because it's a very ethical punk rock club, there's a real sense of identity to it and there's a very sense of lifestyle to it. It must have been fantastic. I mean, it's still going, Gilman Street. It's a really cool venue.
When Green Day formed in 1987, no one, least of all the members, expected to make a living out of it. The band caught the eye of local label Lookout, whose founder, Larry Livermore, had seen the band playing at a party and had likened them to the early Beatles.
I remember Billy especially stood out. I mean, they put on the show of their life. It was as if, I said right there, it was like the Beatles at Shea Stadium. He had that same attitude, that same command, as if he were playing to 60,000 people. You know, kind of a mixture of affection and disdain. You know, he was already a rock star, even though it was just like these 5 kids sitting on the floor, you know, and at the same time, he was really warm and inclusive. You know, he like talked to them and said, "Thanks for coming, and I really appreciate you being here." It was just, you know, before it was 2 or 3 songs into it, I said, well, I'm going to make a record with these guys. And I told him so when Billy asked me afterwards, you know, kind of in his like shy 16-year-old way, well, what'd you think? Were we all right? And I says, I want to make a record with you guys. And he says, oh, okay. And that was the beginning.
In November 1988, Sweet Children made the leap from audience to stage when they began performing at Gilman regularly.
And they became like the house band there. They'd always be the first on. They were just like little kids, 15, 16 years old, first band on every single bill. Virtually they're playing there for like every night, really. That's how they got their chops together. And they just played there, built up a following there. I mean, they're part of all that kind of late 80s California kind of punk scene, bands like Operation Ivy, who became Rancid. But those kind of bands played there as well. And Green Day got kind of friends, all these people. So you can see a little infrastructure build up.
And they started to play Gilman a lot and developed quite a following. And maybe by the end of '89, they played quite a lot of shows, and they were starting to get a reputation as a band that a lot of girls liked. And that was, among some of the punks, that was kind of supposed to be a bad thing, because if all the girls came from the suburbs and stood up front and danced and sort of looked dreamy-eyed at the band, then that meant you were a sellout or a poser. And so some of the more hardcore punks were sneering at them, making fun of them. But, you know, the band didn't seem to mind.
Livermore agreed to finance the high schoolers' earliest recordings. The 1,000-hour single, recorded cheaply and quickly, and released in 1989.
They went in and recorded 4 songs, and then it came up down to about 3 weeks before the record was due to be released in April of 1989. And still no artwork for the cover. We had a bunch of 7-inch records, but no covers, no lyrics, no title, nothing. And then they came to me and said, well, we decided to change our name, and we want to call ourselves Green Day. And I went, no, you can't do that. That's crazy. Everybody knows you as Sweet Children. By everybody, I mean the maybe 500 or 1,000 people we were hoping might buy the record. And he says, well, it's too late. We've decided, you know, Sweet Children's dumb, and it's too much like Sweet Baby, which was another Gilman band. And I said, well, we don't. How can we do this? And he said, well, we'll just do it. And I learned then there was a couple of the bands I worked with. You know, there was no point in arguing with. They would decide, and they would announce it to the label, and that was that. And so, although I said Green Day is a stupid name, it doesn't mean anything, and so on and so on. We stuck to it, and at the last minute. My partner in the label at that time, David Hayes, just sort of drew a logo for Green Day and said, well, we'll call it by the name of the first song on the record, 1,000 Hours. And I went off to the copy shop and Xeroxed 1,000 sheets of paper with that on it and folded them up and stuck them into a plastic bag with each record. And that was their first record. It came out in early April of '89, 1,000 Hours.
Here we go again.
We pressed 1,000 of the first 7-inch, and it kind of built up fairly slowly. I think it probably only sold a few hundred at first, and then over the course of the year probably sold out its first pressing of 1,000. and then picked up quite a bit.
Soon the band were recording their full-length debut album, 39 Smooth, over one weekend in San Francisco.
That came out in April of 1990, and that's when we first knew that something big was happening. When we did a record release party in April of 1990 at Gilman, and it was not just for Green Day, it was for another band, sort of a more metallic rock type band called Neurosis, who were pretty big at the time. And when we got there, we were one of the kids that was working with me and I. We arrived at the gig with a whole boxes of records to sell, and I was driving, and Chris, who was with me, said, "Holy cow, look at this, Larry!" And I looked up, and they were queued up all the way down the street. There was 500, 800 people standing outside and waiting to get into Gilman for just like a Lookout Records release show. It was pretty mind-blowing. I mean, honestly, because we knew things had been building up, but not to that extent. And we were selling records hand over fist to the point where we had no place to put the money anymore. It was like about 3 a.m. We were driving back, and we were still like keep finding, like, you know, where we'd stuff more wads of money into this pocket and that pocket, and we'd sold out every single record we'd brought to that gig. It was hard to believe that like something we'd started had turned into this. It was almost kind of scary.
First album, Green Day, it sounds like a band fully formed. The songwriting is there. It's just a production which isn't quite as good. But of course it wouldn't be, because the band haven't got as much money. They haven't played as many gigs, and they're young, you know. So, but if you took those songs and re-recorded them with the budgets they had later on, 5 years later, a lot of those songs would fit into any of those albums.
It seems to be full of songs about girls. I think there's like only two other tracks on there that don't talk about some kind of angst relationship with girls.
You can't expect 15, 16, 17-year-olds to write these great, you know, 3 verses on the deconstructing the political situation in America. I mean, it is about spots, boys and girls, and fart jokes. I mean, that's basically where you're at when you're 15 or 16, and Green Day were kind of mirroring that very well.
All was going well until John decided to give up the pursuit of punk stardom in favor of a college education. This would turn out to be the crucial turning point in Green Day's career, when they hooked up with fellow Gilman graduate Frank Edwin Wright III, better known as Tre Cool, a precocious and hyperactive drummer with local band The Lookouts. Though Tre came from the remote mountain town of Willits, by his mid-teens, he was already a fixture on the Berkeley punk scene with a reputation as a promising drummer and a nose for mischief. He was the perfect candidate to fill the vacant Green Day drum stool.
He had joined the band at the end of 1990 after our band kind of sputtered out. And so it did create a new sound. I mean, John was a good drummer, but not a great drummer. He was competent, and he had a lot of energy and spirit. But Tre, by this time, had become, you know, a genuinely great drummer, and it was a new level of performance that the band was capable of now.
So in 1991, with Tre on board, they recorded their second album, Kerplunk, their first as the Green Day lineup we know today. The album showcased Billy Joel's talent for writing songs that combine the melodies of British bands of the 60s with the energy of 70s punk rock and 80s hardcore.
In those days, we often would take the tape down to Los Angeles to have it mastered. And I liked to go down because there was this engineer guy who'd been doing it since the 60s, and it was almost as much just because I'd get to sit around with him and hear stories about Frank Sinatra and Frank Zappa and all of the other, and the Beach Boys and all these other bands he'd worked with. And he'd just sit there and tell stories while he was doing the settings on our tapes. And then at the end, he'd give me a cassette, and I'd listen to it on the way back home. And I got onto the plane and put it on a Walkman, and the minute the first chords kicked in, I just said, whoa, this is something way bigger than I had ever expected. It was the first song, I think it was 2,000 Light Years Away on the first song on Kerplunk. I mean, I'd heard it a bunch of times before, but now that it was mastered and ready to become a record, I just knew that I had gotten into something far bigger than I'd ever imagined before, and that nothing was going to be the same again anymore. And it wasn't. It was the beginning of quite a wild ride.
Kerplunk is it's actually a good record, really. I mean, the band have learned to play their instruments. They've got Tre Cool in. I think he just totally tightens up the rhythm section, and basically the band seem as though they've travelled, they've done the gigging circuit, and they've listened to their original recording, and they've just really stepped up. You know, as a result, the album Kerplunk just sounds far more together.
With proper digs in the basement at 2243 Ashby Street, the guys were now living, eating, and breathing as one band. The band had little in the way of money and did the odd menial job to get by between playing increasingly bigger tours.
There's this kind of period from about 1990 to 1992. I always wondered how they survived. I mean, I was paying them regular royalties from their record sales, which was a help, but it wasn't enough to live on. And their lifestyle was pretty chaotic. I mean, they were a bunch of kids who just left home and had never lived on their own before. And I knew that while John was still in the band, he was the one that took care of all the money and making sure they got up in time to get to the gig. And you know, he was kind of the mum of the band, really. And once he was gone, though, I mean, and he was replaced with Tre. I mean, Tre was the most chaotic of all. So I would stop and think sometimes, well, how are they paying their bills? Who's taking care of the money? I mean, how is this working?
You know, when we started our band, we never thought in a million years that we would end up where we are right now, because it was anyone before us, it never happened. So, you know, but you know, it's like I always just try to treat it as, you know, another day, and I just don't even think about it, you know, just having a good time and you know, doing what we feel is right, you know.
One of the things that was always endearing about them is they were excited just to play. They didn't really worry too much about in fact, they didn't worry about money at all, or fame, or records. It was kind of partly my job to get them to concentrate long enough to make a record, because they were, as long as there was a gig to play, and if they weren't playing, they would be probably sitting around jamming on their guitars. They were happy.
Welcome to
It was kind of me that, I think, in a way, that kept going at them and saying, look, you know, people are really buying the record, people really like you, you know, you can be serious about this. And they were kind of like, I don't want to be that serious, I want to have fun.
It was live that Green Day built their reputation, playing everywhere and anyway, including in 1991, a hectic European tour that saw the band playing everywhere from squats to snooker halls.
But it was all like sort of very kind of hand-to-mouth touring. It was like little clubs, you know, in a van. Some kids here from the UK were driving them. They weren't making any money, but they were paying their own way, and which was, which was good because they didn't have any other jobs, and they had, as long as they stayed on the road, they had a place to sleep and they had something to eat. And I think that was kind of their attitude.
To give you some idea of what the tour was like, Billy Joe Armstrong contracted lice from this tour. The conditions were so, let's be kind, let's say they were rustic. The conditions were rustic.
They played something like 60, 65 shows in 3 months, which is quite a tough schedule. They were used to it though, because they were living sort of, again, hand to mouth. But this time it was in a whole different culture.
They weren't really paid for the shows. They toured around in vans. They didn't bring equipment over. They brought albums to sell. They brought a screen so they could print T-shirts as and when needed to be, and that's how they made their money.
You know, coming into a British winter when you're used to the California sunshine is going to be pretty jarring. They played squats in Denmark, in Germany. They went to Spain. They just roughed it basically. They didn't get a lot of publicity out of it. But what they did in 1991 by touring Europe was just sort of start lots of little fires, if you like, across Europe, which when they came back, you know, were sort of burning brighter, if you like.
I did see them on the first tour, but they weren't really that known. I mean, I remember seeing them, there was about 30 people at the gig in Newport, Wales, and they were great, but again, it was you couldn't really place them into the scene because we're in a very kind of Nirvana, kind of pre-Nirvana, getting massive era, but it's all that kind of things going on there, there's grunge going on. There's no space for pop punk in Britain then, it wasn't really kind of a known scene. So yeah, you're kind of seeing, but when you see them then playing there, there's not really a massive different show to what they do now. It's still like goofing about, great songs, without, you know, just there wasn't 14,000 people watching it.
That carried on well into 1992, but by that time some of the gigs were starting to get pretty big, and they were starting to make some serious money. Still mostly DIY gigs, but you know, when you get 500 or 600 kids turning up, that can turn into some serious money. I mean, by their standards.
Soon, on word of mouth alone, 39 Smooth and Kerplunk had notched up sales of 50,000 copies each, and it was clear they needed some help taking care of their business affairs.
Lookout was a very small label. For a label operating at the level that Lookout was, to sell 50,000 copies was really pushing the limits of what they could do. And I know that Green Day were going out on tour at that point, maybe 91 or 92, I think 93. They weren't able to find the records in stores. Their distribution wasn't that great, and Lookout really didn't help them to book shows. They needed a more professional way of doing things than they had been. I think they realized that they'd gotten a little too big to just do it themselves.
They were one of the bands that didn't take a lot of hands-on energy. I mean, the main thing I had to do was keep the records pressed, write them their checks. We paid the bands quarterly, and I had to keep them paid and answer questions. Really, you know, like they'd say, "How's that work?" or "What are we going to do here?" And I would tell them. Sometimes I didn't, you know, as they toured more and more, I didn't see them as much as I used to. I mean, it used to be they'd just drop by and hang out, and now sometimes I wouldn't see them for a month or two at a time. And that continued on into 93, and it was in 93 when the rumors started really flying that, oh, the majors are interested in them.
They chose two attorneys, Elliot Kahn and Jeff Saltzman, who had previously represented bands such as Mudhoney, Primus, and the Melvins. They got to work touting the band's latest demo to all the major record labels.
I think it must have been sometime in the spring of 93, the rumors really started flying, and people started asking me, what are you going to do now if you don't have Green Day? And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. They haven't told me, and I haven't even seen them for about 3 or 4 weeks. And then I ran into Tre, and I said, what's going on? I hear all these stories. And he kind of hemmed and hawed, which was unlike Tre. Usually he's, you know, well, they called him Motor Mouth, and he, you know, a mile a minute talking about everything. And he just was kind of, obviously, but I'd known him since he was like 9 years old. He couldn't, you know, get away with that too long. So he finally said, well, yeah, we're talking to this management kind of agency. And I says, oh, well, you know, were you planning on telling me? And, you know, why don't you get the other guys and we'll talk about it? And so we went down to a nearby cafe, and you know, it quickly came out that they weren't just talking, that they'd pretty much already signed a deal with these two management guys who had mostly worked with metal bands before, like Exodus and The Possessed, things like that, who kind of knew nothing about the scene, but who had promised to get them a major label deal.
This is off one of our records that no one has. When I was younger, thought that the world struggled around me. But in time, I realized I was so wrong.
I mean, I'd seen a lot of bands by that time signed to major labels on the basis of having sold 10 or 20,000 records. The majors would, you know, put out a record. If it didn't sell a lot, they'd be dropped, and they'd be history, just like that. And I thought it would be a real tragedy if that happened to them. But as it turned out, they proved to be the exception. You know, the 1 out of 100 that hit it big right from the start.
The band quickly found themselves the subject of a bidding war that ended when they decided to sign with Reprise Records A&R man and producer Rob Cavallo. Signing to a major label created division in the punk scene that had spawned Green Day. Some critics claiming the band had sold out and could never be credible again. Others recognized the new opportunities and financial backing available to a band who had always applied a pop sensibility to songwriting. So what difference did it make?
Green Day were destined to be going around in ever-decreasing circles, playing to their fan base. But the moment they signed to a major label, that was their chance to really dive into the spotlight.
I think they knew how good they were. I mean, they've always been fairly confident bands, but I think they were sat down when they were writing these songs thinking, well, why not? We could have hits with these. Lookout can't do it. It was nothing down on Lookout. I mean, Lookout was a good, big underground label, but to get right to mainstream these days, it's not the 1970s anymore. This is the 90s. You had to deal with the monster to get into the mainstream. So they did the right thing. They signed to major. They could have signed to Epitaph, who's becoming the biggest punk label of the lot at the time. But the way Billy Joe says it, why should I go from one independent label to another bigger independent label? That's an insult to Lookout. You know, if you're going to leave Lookout, go to the biggest label you possibly can, and that's what he did.
Independent labels give you a lot of credibility, but ultimately the reality means you're not going to get played on radio or on mainstream radio. You're not going to get played on TV, and you're not going to get cool critics talking about you, because ultimately, in simple terms, people aren't going to hear about it.
Being signed to a large label like Reprise would mean that suddenly they were able to have the budget, have the studio time, have the distribution sources in place, you know, be able to sort of look at Europe and generally have the support of a massive commercial business behind them.
If you're on an indie label selling 50,000 records, you know, maybe you go to a major label and sell twice that many. You're considered a failure in major label standards, but you'd be a huge indie band. But if you're going to sell 10 million records, yeah, sign with the major label, but you can't predict that.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine?
Armed with a number of new compositions, Green Day entered Berkeley's Fantasy Studios to begin work on their breakthrough album Dookie, with their equally young A&R man Rob Cavallo producing. Though they were now entering the arena of the major label rock band, the plan was a simple one: to keep on doing what they did best. And for Green Day, that involved penning short, sharp, melodic songs about the subjects both they and their audience knew about: sexual frustration, boredom, poverty, and angst. But rather than being downbeat, Green Day's approach was one of energy, humor, and excitement.
Well, when Dookie came out, the whole thing had changed. You know, you've got like rock's gone mainstream. You know, the Nirvana kicked open the doors. There's a huge space, people listening. And there's like a big grunge scene, but I think a lot of people picked up Nirvana because they actually like the punk rock edge of Nirvana. They liked it because it was energetic. A lot of the grunge bands are actually pretty dull, you know, so they're pretty boring.
I thought a lot of the grunge bands were nothing but arena rock bands, but they haven't washed their hair. They were boring. It was all introverted, and it really didn't say anything.
I think lyrically people picked up on the you're not a macho rock star, you're just a kid getting kicked about kind of thing. And I think Green Day picked up, didn't copy those lyrics, they're writing those kind of lyrics anyway. The kind of the small town loser, I'm the spotty kid, sod you kind of lyrics, which Nirvana wrote, it's kind of introspective, but Green Day did a lot more humour, probably a little less depth. And those kind of things hit a nerve.
There was all of these sort of grunge bands. There was the Pearl Jams and the Soundgardens, and I just felt like we were a wrecking ball that was ready to just destroy the house that grunge built.
I wouldn't say they tapped into the zeitgeist in the way that Nirvana did, but what I think Green Day did was actually give voice to the concerns and habits of what their fans were into, and that's a clever trick.
Welcome to paradise.
And Green Day wrote fun songs about quite light topics most of the time, I would say. So actually kids could bounce around, listening to their records. And they were exciting sounding records. So the vibe that came off of those records, you could almost smell it.
And I'm never gonna go. Pay attention to the electric and the broken note.
You write the songs, you record them, 3 months later a record comes out, then you're out taking over the world, hopefully.
Welcome to paradise.
The band worked quickly and easily. The bulk of Dookie had been written by Billy Joe Armstrong during time off the road in 1993 in his basement Berkeley flat, surrounded by empty beer cans, clothes, and broken equipment. Welcome to Paradise was the song that bridged the gap between the scuzzy teen punks of old with the newly wealthy major label recording stars. A live favorite, the song was the highlight of their previous Lookout album, Kerplunk, and deemed too good to resign to the past.
Welcome to Paradise was very significant in terms of the development of the band because it was actually probably the first Green Day song that anyone heard that addressed anything more than teenage angst and, the issues of a teenager growing up in America.
Timothy, can you hear me laughing? Expecting someone says that I am a girl.
And while it wasn't exactly what you would call a political song, it was about as political as they got at that time.
Now feeling like I am, and I'm never gonna go. Pay attention to the crazy and the broken note. Some call it slugs of falling light. I wanna take it through a wasteland I like to call my own. Welcome to paradise.
If you compare the single, what I thought of as a single for Kerplunk, Welcome to Paradise, you can actually compare those two mixes, and what Rob Cavallo does to it is what it's all about in taking a band up to that level where you're going to hawk them around the world. If you listen to that track, every part of the drum take is absolutely spot on, and every single part of the vocal take and the guitar takes, and they're all absolutely spot on. And it's not really a major secret. If you do all of that, then you end up with a far more polished product, and that's generally what the public respond to.
In April 1994, the rock world was stunned when the Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain took his own life. With his passing, grunge lost its appeal, and the doors were opened for a new breed of bands to storm the charts. They had an entirely different outlook on life, and leading the way was Green Day. They had released Dookie's first single, Longview, just 3 months before Cobain's suicide, the perfect antidote to the damaged psyche of rock music.
The whole Nirvana thing had sort of had its first peak. It had been 2.5 years since Nevermind came out when Dookie came out. I think they were like they stepped into that void where people are saying, what's next? What's coming along? And it was them.
Well, that song came about at Billy's house. He had this riff, he doesn't. And he played that. And then Mike started going, and I started doing that thing.
And it's a real menacing quality about it. And, so the lyrics, I just wanted something that was like, kind of a schizophrenic kind of thing where there's this sort of rolling bass line that happens and this sort of smooth feel, and then all of a sudden it just blasts into
Build me up, that's Velcro stick, get me moving. I sure as hell can't do it by myself.
Lyrically, Longview was a postcard sent from the mind of a yawning, channel-hopping, weed-smoking generation, numbed into submission by bad TV and a total lack of motivation, yet angry enough to sing about it. This contrast was reflected in the differences between the laconic apathy of the laid-back verses and the rousing big rock bursts of the choruses. Naturally, it struck a chord with those living similar lives, and the song was soon receiving heavy TV and radio rotation. Not bad for an album whose title was a slang word for baby shit.
Longview was the first single, which was actually a little bit of a surprise, all things considered, and it's not overly sort of poppy really. It's got that kind of tribal drum beat feel, and it's fairly spacious throughout. It's not got the same immediacy as Basket Case, but nonetheless, that's a great single too.
I think Longview didn't reveal anything about the band that we hadn't already suspected. These boys spent their time smoking dope and wanking in their bedrooms. Nice romantic track. But it was, I think Longview was almost like a script from, an episode of Beavis and Butthead. It really was,
And the band that recorded Dookie are a far away band from the band that recorded, 1,000 Hours. And I think that this is when Tre Cool is now in his own, and I think that Billy Joe Armstrong and Mike Dirnt are working with each other very well. In songs like Longview, the three of them are just one unit. There's three separate parts, but they're sitting together as one unit, and it's got the kind of vibe of a band that a band should have. And I think that comes from extensive touring and those previous years working up to Dookie.
When Dookie was released in January of 1994, Green Day's reputation was just beginning to spread. The band had their critics, mostly their old fans, a large section of the punk community who had turned their back on Green Day for signing to a major. Despite this, the band saw their fan base swell considerably.
As I give myself the creep, sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. I face coming ahead, and my chest paranoid, my chest up.
Dookie was the album that took Green Day's highly infectious sound to the world. With the album complete, the band hit the road first with the melodic punk legends Bad Religion, then with a series of career-defining festival performances, including Woodstock, Lollapalooza, and their own arena shows.
I think playing all the festivals and being a great live band was great. But there's so many factors why that record did really well. I think people, there was a feeling that a lot of kind of the kids, you know, the young kids, the Mal kids, the post-Nirvana generation were looking for another band, you know, and Green Day came along. They touched on similar themes, but they touched them in a different kind of way. But I mean, they had that kind of potty humour that's very big in America. But there's also a seriousness to the record as well. They're really good songs. Every single song on the record is like a little mini anthem of its own. I mean, they're really, really dead catchy songs. Really well produced. Great videos as well. MTV picks up on them, which is a very important fact as well. MTV very rarely plays any guitar rock music, no matter what it says. And they picked up on Green Day. That helps a lot. Playing the festivals helped a lot. Woodstock put them right into the mainstream, like it was in proper news in America, where they got covered in mud on the stage. And they actually, you know, there's always one band that comes away to festivals as champions, and they really did. They were the talk of the festival. Well, Woodstock was a complete disaster, but Green Day kind of encapsulated everything that was about that festival. You know, they took the piss out of it. It was all over the television. There was mud flying. There was like loads of really funny comments. So they became the band of the festival. Got loads of headlines off that. That bumped the sales of the record up.
Hey, everybody say shut the fuck up and we'll stop playing. Wait, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're done. Goodbye.
There's so many things went right from that year. You know, sometimes when you're in a band, everything goes right. It's not like most times it's like everything goes wrong. But then that year, everything's like bang, 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 like a load of skills went down. It was right. They delivered a great record, and everything went right. You know, with it, the promotion, the timing, everything was perfect.
A year after its release, the album had sold a staggering 5 million copies worldwide, won numerous awards, and seized the post-grunge zeitgeist. Green Day had entered the major league and were reaping all the financial rewards that comes from international success. Aside from the music, the punk scene left one other lasting impression on Green Day. As they saw themselves outselling the biggest pop, rock, and rap stars of the day, the band remained humble and self-deprecating, preferring to stick with what they knew best.
I don't know. I don't really succumb to whatever the business has to offer. I just, you know, I do my own thing. You know, it's tough. You know, you get a lot of demons that lurk around and, you know, want you to be something else. But, you know, you just got to put walls up and have the right people around you. And it's about friends and family. You know.
Tired, dizzy, and dazed after 12 non-stop months, the new year ushered in feelings of introspection. Grappling with their newfound fame, the guys decided to look deeper into themselves for inspiration for the next album. With the success of their major label debut, the band were expected to deliver a follow-up as soon as humanly possible, which meant a lot of sleepless nights, assisted by the band's dabbling in the old punk's drug of choice, methamphetamine, more commonly known as speed. It was a combination of sleeplessness and anxiety at their newfound status as spokesmen of a generation that spawned many of the themes on the aptly titled Insomniac album.
I've been trying to sleep. I'm counting sheep by running out.
Insomniac was a darker record. It didn't have an obvious hit record on it, but it was just Green Day pulling back from the mainstream. Because I think a lot of bands of punk roots, they see the mainstream. They don't like the mainstream that much. They have songs they know will get into the mainstream. When they see what the mainstream's about, they want to pull back from it. You know, it's easy to say, you know, like, oh yeah, I deliberately didn't have a hit record. But let's not forget this record still sold 2 million copies. I mean, for a flop record, that's not bad going, is it? So it wasn't as instantly radio friendly. And it still had good songs on it, but there wasn't anything like Basket Case, which is like a wham bam, complete radio MTV smash. It didn't have stuff like that on the record. But you listen to it now, it is a really strong record.
That record held a lot of pent-up aggression, you know, and frustration and discontent.
We were always like just trying to get tough, as hard as we could play.
It just sort of came out bleak sounding.
They were trying to manage themselves at the time they made it. Billy Joe Armstrong was taking amphetamines and staying up all night and writing these kind of gnarled songs. Brain Stew certainly comes from that period, about, you know, strung out in his room. Geek Stink Breath is about someone whose breath smells because they've taken so much speed. Insomniac really is kind of, in my opinion, Green Day's standalone album. It works in context as a bridge between Dookie and Nimrod, but it also works as a snapshot of a band who have perhaps received more than they expected.
Insomniac may not have topped the commercial and critical success of Dookie, but then few albums ever have. It did, however, sell millions and spawn a clutch of singles that showed that Green Day were more than just a one-album flash in the pan. Songs such as J.A.R., which featured on the film Angus, and Brain Stew Jaded were firm radio favorites. Yet for some reason, Insomniac didn't quite hit the spot. It entered the US album charts at number 2, which along with a change in management was enough to prompt certain critics to wonder whether Green Day had already peaked. It was speculation, not helped when the band canceled a European tour in spring '96 and immediately returned to California, citing an exhaustive, unrelenting schedule as the reason.
They consider themselves to be not particularly great alive during that period. They were playing far too fast. They were worried about how many songs the audience knew that preceded Dookie. So they weren't playing a great many songs. They were messing around a lot in the set. They were kind of suffering panic attacks. Mike Dirnt was certainly suffering panic attacks. Billy Joe was suffering anxiety attacks. They were tired. They were attempting to manage themselves. And they'd never ever cancelled a tour before. They cancelled the European tour. They played the UK. They played the Brixton Academy. They hit the stage at 8:15 p.m. and were off by 9:30 p.m. because Billy Joe wanted to read a bedtime story to his child. So they were clearly not particularly happy not as a band necessarily, but as a live working unit. And they just kind of thought, I think they thought that cancelling a tour would be the worst thing in the world, and then they realised that perhaps they needed to do it.
Looking back on it now, it's probably a decision which possibly saved their career, because, you know, when a band has hit that level of success and the second album does well, it's often, you've seen it in other bands, that's when things often go wrong. Exhaustion kicks in, or the drink and drugs take precedence over the music. But Green Day did the right thing. I mean, at the time they disappointed lots of fans, but I'm sure anyone could see why they would do such a thing.
Green Day spent the rest of 1996 resting and writing new material. Though the canceled tour had disappointed fans, it may have been a move that saved the band's sanity. The result was a smart set of 18 songs called Nimrod that pushed the boundaries of punk pop and broadened the band's sound to fleetingly take in elements of ska, hardcore, and so much more besides. Mainly though, it was the sound of Green Day firing on all cylinders. Recording on their new record began in the summer of 1997, and the guys were in high spirits. Tre and Mike experimented with new instruments, and Billy Joe figured out a better way of laying down the vocals. Such new techniques served them well, and Nimrod suggested a band who still had plenty to say.
Nimrod I really like because it's still the 3-chord template, but they're doing a lot to make it a very interesting progressive record. It goes through different styles and ideas, but as with all good records, really, it's still got a through line. You know, it's still true to what they do, but it just holds your ear, and it's a successful record for doing that. Nimrod is the first chance they get to sort of take stock of things and actually decide what kind of record they want to make.
Well, here they've decided, like, well, why not be a pop band? Why not do the styles of music? You know, they still did it. They still did good pop punk songs on the album, but it wasn't so much. They were tied into that kind of format. You know, people are accusing of sellouts. You know, you get the sniping. They thought, well, stop that. Why should we bother? You know, why should we listen to what people are saying about us? We write good pop songs. We do good pop songs. If we do a punkier song, we do a punkier song. If we'll get an acoustic guitar and play a song, we'll do that. And that's eventually that's what created the big hit on the album.
Released in mid-October of 1997, Nimrod went down well with the fans, who bought 80,000 copies in the first week. Green Day felt positive about it too. Their decision to experiment with a different type of songwriting and instrumentation paid off. The introspective acoustic song Time of Your Life, Good Riddance unveiled a change of pace for the first time and seemed to become the soundtrack to everyone's life at a moment of crisis.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Time grabs you by the wrist, directs you where to go. So make the best of this test and don't ask why. It's not a question.
I think it was great, man. I was so excited about that song.
Probably the most punk thing we could have done is put that on the record at that point.
I couldn't wait for that song to come out as a single. I just knew that the reaction was going to be really bizarre, but huge.
It was like everybody's prom song. It was everybody's graduation song. And that's like, you never expected to write somebody's prom song, you know? You never got invited to your prom.
Photographs and still frames in your mind.
It dominated the charts and struck a chord with people both sides of the ocean, taking on an anthemic life of its own when it was used on the final episode of Seinfeld, one of the most watched TV episodes of all times, and punctuated poignant moments in ER.
It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you have the time of your life.
Well, Good Riddance is a real departure for Green Day. I mean, it's just basically stripped down. It's just him and an acoustic guitar, isn't it? I mean, yes, he could have walked in and got the rest of the band to play on it, and they could have done it as more of a kick-ass song. But the way it's tender and it's more of an emotional song, and it's great. You know, it shows a nerve to go against what they've been typecast as doing. There is a tenderness, which has been there right from the start. But that song makes it far more obvious. It's a pretty naked, emotional song. Technically, you know, in one way it could be commercial suicide, but sometimes you take a massive risk. It's what can save your neck.
The band was on form. Nimrod was an artistic success, if not so much a commercial one. Though sales didn't really rival those of Dookie and Insomniac, it was an album that put them firmly back where they needed to be. Basking in the glow of critical adulation and a firm, loyal fan base that guaranteed huge live crowds from America to Britain, Japan to Australia, and many more places besides. Their talents as great musicians were formally acknowledged later that year, when they picked up Best Live Performance at that year's Kerrang Awards.
They're not the kind of band who boast, apart from when it comes to their live reputation. They really do believe that they can go up against they could go on any bill and blow any band off the stage.
Are we the best live band out there? Yes.
Don't wanna be an American idiot.
We pride ourselves definitely as being a live band. I don't. Kind of depends on what people are into, but we have a lot of energies on stage, and we love playing live. And I think that's one thing we've always been able to tell about us. And for us, it always starts as being a live band first, you know.
They're amazing live. I mean, they're extremely well rehearsed, very tight, very professional. Of course, they got the songs. A lot of bands have had great songs, but they suck live. Green Day does not suck live.
They all have a lot of personality, and their individual personalities come out on stage. So they're kind of like cartoon characters in a way.
Billy Joe Armstrong, one minute he's like a little twitching energy ball of anger, the next minute he's asking about the crowd. My Dirt is great. He's probably the most conventionally punk rock looking member of the band. He's still got the macho, almost Paul Simonon from The Clash, kind of low slung bass, swing around kind of moves. Tre Cool is a really good drummer. I think when he joined the band it made a real difference. It was like, it locked as a rhythm section, that was very important. And as a three-piece, the whole thing works as a perfect kind of dynamic.
There's no progress, revolution going all around the place and nowhere. Taking one day, I leave me with my grudge. Got much of it with radio.
They're bound to be good. They are good. They've been around the world. You know, no band can not be good. It doesn't matter how badly you start. You just by pure doing the same thing night after night, you will become good.
They'd gone to Europe where I think they were playing 4,000 or 5,000 seat places. And then they came back for the first arena show, 11,000 seat, and I asked Trey, I said, "Are you nervous?" And he said, "Fuck yeah." And then they went out and did exactly what they'd been doing all along.
They played squats in Germany right back at the beginning of their career, and they believe that they still bring an element of that sort of street fighting edge to their stadium shows.
We'll always have those insane shows. You know, I think we'll stop when our knees give out. You know, but that's sort of what, you know, it's unpredictable and chaos, and kids just having a good time. I mean, we'd never want to lose sight of, because that's you know, such a huge part of Green Day.
Green Day were back to doing what they enjoyed best. In November 1997, their show at a Tower Records in New York turned into a full-scale riot after Billy Joe spray-painted "Fuck You" on the store's window and told the crowd, "You can do anything you want, because you're not at Tower Records, you're at a Green Day concert." After a 45-minute set, the band then destroyed their equipment and fans wrecked half the shop. As all went quiet on the Green Day front, few expected that some of the first tunes to be written after the final Nimrod shows were steadily developing into a sound that was a departure from anything they had done before. An album that would firmly place Billy Joe Armstrong in the category of classic American songwriters such as Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen. That album was entitled Warning.
By the time the band came to record Warning, they'd had quite a bit of time off in the previous year. In 1999, it's that kind of been lying low for a while, being at home with the wives, their kids, or, you know, there's a few marriages and divorces along the way. But Warning was kind of really very much Billy Joe's album.
Billy Joe, I think, saw Warning as the album that would have brought Green Day to a natural ending, in as much as the band were trying to fulfill what they saw as their fans' desires. They were trying to basically go into the trap, trying to second guess what Green Day fans wanted. Trey and Mike weren't happy because they thought that Billy Joe was being too bossy. Basically, I think they'd been frozen out in terms of ideas. So Warning was a warning, if you like.
He was probably making a concerted effort not to write another straightforward punk pop record. He realised that to achieve longevity, they would have to sort of diversify slightly. So Warning was really a kind of a snapshot of Billy Joe Armstrong's mindset at the time.
It was to be a departure from anything that had gone before. Their aim was to capture their true sound, a personal political statement of everything they stood for. So they started by recording the album in Studio 880 right at home in Oakland, California, late '99. And completed the album in the summer of 2000 in LA.
I own the studio here, Studio 880. Green Day, the first time they came in here, I've never met them, they never met us, and I was introduced to chaos. It was just insane. They were pure punks at best, a lot of practical jokes, you know, just, it was a mess, and had a lot of fun. They would amazingly get here before me, and I get here at 9 a.m. And at least Mike would, you know, because he couldn't wait to start the day. And I'd leave here at 6, and they'd probably be here well into the night, as long as ideas were flowing. You know, the fun in between was just to, you know, let's freshen up our minds. If Billy has to work late, and his wife will come by with his kids, and they'll have a quick dinner here, you know. But other than that, it's pretty much business and play. But their play is doing music. That's the funny thing, is they work so goddamn hard in the studio doing music to say, I need a break. Let's go jam in the other room. Guess they love it.
Underdog, there of which I stand alone. The face in the crowd, a song against the mold. Without a doubt, singled out the only way
Whereas previous album Nimrod had been a collection of new ideas and song styles, it had still nevertheless been a punk pop record. Now with Warning, the band wanted to experiment further with their new album. Not happy with the new producer allocated to the task, Green Day wasted no time in getting rid of the guy and taking over the reins. Of course, their long-standing producer Rob Cavallo was there to oversee. But the guys decided to make it their own album, with Billy particularly involved in the production process. With Warning, Green Day ditched their traditional punk pop trademark sound and pushed themselves to the hilt.
They had a mariachi band at one point that came into the studio, and horn players. They pulled it in, but you'd be surprised how much they do on their own. Some of the different instruments, keyboards. Like I say, Tre playing the accordion and things like that. Unreal.
They were kind of following Billie Joe Armstrong's songwriting vision, but there was still time for a few pranks and stuff like that. So when they were, one song in particular, Blood, Sex and Booze, for reasons unknown, they decided they wanted the sound of a whip cracking or they wanted to get a dominatrix into the studio, probably for the sheer hell of it.
Tre was online on the computer in the lounge, and he's always looking at just the weirdest things. And he was looking at dominatrix girls online and just kind of yucking it up. And I was just sitting on the couch, and my intern, who just got stepped up to assistant engineer, real young green kid, kind of nervous. He walked in, and I said, "Hey Tre, you should hire one of those dominatrix to beat the hell out of my intern, if he wants an album credit." And Tre goes, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, dude, you're not gonna get a credit unless you take a beating like a man." And our assistant named Tone, he thought he was kidding. Next day, Mistress Simone, and she was scary. I mean, stilettos, tattoos, it's awesome. And it's just, oh my God. Tre was happy. Tone was freaked out. He wanted to run out of the building. He wanted to throw up. He wanted to cry like a little girl. He'll never admit to that. But that day, he got his ass kicked. And it's on the front of that song. And he came up, and it was the funniest thing. I said, "How was it?" "I don't know, it's in a weird way. It was kind of cool." We really harmed that guy.
Why don't they move for the pain she puts you through is what I need, so make it clean.
This mellow, hooky album also had all the hallmarks of their wider range of influences, and silenced critics who accused them of being nothing more than a radio-friendly, throwaway punk band. Influences such as the Beatles, Elvis Costello, The Replacements, and even old pop songs such as Downtown, which provided the blueprint for Hold On, were obvious.
It's a very melodic record, and if you listen, you can hear snippets or snatches or almost sort of rip-offs of songs which have gone before. And it worked in their favour, though. You could, there was a familiarity to their songs.
I really like Warning. I think it's really good. And Warning, you could definitely hear. In some ways, I think it's a warm-up to American Idiot. I think that lyrically, it's not a political record, but there's a few more topics getting mixed in there. And instrumentally, it's quite interesting. Well, acoustic guitars are in there. It's not all. It's not wimpy. It's fast and it's exciting.
When Green Day recorded Warning, they did it pretty much how all the other bands do it. They book a certain amount of time, and they're under time constraints to get a record done. And how do you let yourself go artistically if you're under time constraints, especially when you have that much talent?
Today's a Macy's Day Parade. The night of the living dead is on its way, with a credit report for duty call.
Catchy, reflective, and rather like folk music in parts, it seemed to some that Green Day had gone off the boil with this new direction. Compared to the dizzy platinum heights of their first 4 albums, Warning has only ever made gold, though it remains an album loved by many fans and the record that bridged the gap from the snotty punks of old to the maturing statesmen we know and love today. Now was the time, the record bosses thought, to put out a compilation or two.
In the absence of a new studio album, the record label put out not 1 but 2 compilation albums, International Super Hits, which was, a collection of the greatest hits. And they also put out Shenanigans, which was a compilation of B-sides and sort of unreleased tracks.
In the summer of 2002, Green Day toured the UK, and that record was simply put out there, simply to have something to sell for the tour. International Super Hits is another thing entirely. There was a song on it called Maria, which was a new song, which was a pretty decent song. But in that sense, it's a one-song album because everybody already owned the other songs. It's filler.
In some ways, maybe mentally, it's just a way of like saying, right, that phase is over now, so here's all the leftovers, here's the bits, that's the bookend of that part of our career. Now let's move on to the next bit, and the next bit is like an amazing bit.
The band did come back for International Super Hits. They recorded Maria and another song. And I believe that's when 9/11 occurred. It was a weird day in the studio. It was a weird month in the studio. They were very happy-go-lucky, and one day, just real hard thing to deal with for those guys, and for ourselves, of course.
Once again, the press were speculating that perhaps Green Day were winding down. After all, they had released not 1, but 2 compilations in quick succession, usually a sign that a record company is capitalizing on a band's popularity before it dwindles completely. However, the band and their fans knew differently. Having toured Warning, they took some time off to reflect on their future and what direction they could possibly take with their next record.
Somebody stop it! It's the Pop Disaster Tour, man!
I love being on stage.
You guys ready to sing along?
If I could, I would play for 2 more hours after, just because when I get into that moment, so we just completely lose ourselves in it. I have to feed off of what they're doing, and then they feed off me and making sure that every single person is shaking their ass in that building.
In 2002, Green Day went out on the road again with Blink-182 for the Pop Disaster Tour. Whoever thought of that name must have been a clairvoyant. Green Day were burnt out, cheesed off about how Warning had turned out, and generally fed up with each other. It probably wasn't helped that they were sharing stages with a younger band who had borrowed all their best ideas from Green Day themselves.
Everybody's a little nervous because the press and everybody, they try and set up some sort of like rivalry between Green Day and Blink.
It's just lame, but that's what outsiders want to see. They want to see like some friction.
They're a band that really influenced our whole style of music and really opened doors for our whole genre of music and taught people about what punk rock really is.
We're just going out there and being Green Day, and they're being Blink, and everybody can kind of see for themselves.
Blink-182 were a very popular band. They were as big as Green Day, really, at that time. But they were as big as Green Day for doing more or less what Green Day had done, which was like these simple, bouncy, energetic songs with a kind of dumb toilet humour as part of it. So they did this tour, and I believe they finished the tour early because they realised that, it could reflect badly on them, really, being closely associated with one of their own doppelgangers, if you like.
And the only reason Green Day took that tour was to destroy Blink-182. That was the only reason that they took that tour. And that they did. It was just quite remarkable just how on their game they were and how much of an effort they made. And I think that experience and that kind of exposure set the ground for American Idiot.
So Green Day had already been forced to face the music, and as things came to a head, it was time to face each other. In approaching their new album, Billy Joe suggested some sort of group counseling in which the band spoke openly of their feelings, both positive and negative for one another. And it worked.
As Billy Joe described, he said to the other guys, do you really still want to do this? They don't have to do it. They've got enough money to last them the rest of their lives. And it wasn't a question of just coming up with new song ideas or different chord progressions. The problem is always in the relationships. And it was only when they sat down and Mike and Tre were brave enough to say, you stop being an arsehole and we'll start contributing stuff. I think the way he described it to me was, you may be the president, but you still need a cabinet. Billy Joe decided to swallow his pride a bit and not be so sensitive about the nasty things that they were saying to him. So that was the first thing, sort the relationships out. The second thing was a proper work ethic and a proper workspace. They set up this studio as basically their kind of playground.
They were here for 15 months when they were here last time, when they wrote American Idiot. It was not written before they came in here, and they just basically booked the studio just to experiment, to find out what they needed to do as artists. So they stayed, and they said, we're going to do it until we feel it. And apparently they felt it, and so the band, it was just a perfect working machine.
Green Day recorded like crazy, 12 hours a day and 5 days a week, putting down fake Christmas songs and hip-hop tracks. They even recorded the entire Money Money 2020 album in the guise of a goofy punk band, The Network, a project they still won't own up to.
I asked them about The Network because there was this rumor that that Network album, Money Money 2020, was the lost Green Day album. And I'm sure Mike said, no, that's ridiculous. The other two just laughed. So draw your own conclusions.
The Network was done here, but never got to see what those guys look like.
They will insist that it's not them, when it very, very obviously is.
Halfway through recordings, however, disaster struck when the studio was burgled and a number of recordings from the album proper were stolen. Though some backup copies had been made, they took the opportunity to start their album again. Clearing the air made room for the band's most creative juices to flow, and to aid those juices, they kicked off the proceedings with lots and lots of fun and games.
Come to the studio, and there's spray paint Raiders crap all over the side of my building. And this isn't the first time. Usually it's something silly, but there was just Raiders crap all over. I'm like, great, ha, ha, ha. So I went in and I went into my surveillance system, and we found those three guys out there on the surveillance cam, just sitting there spraying and laughing and drinking or whatever, right? So I went into the lounge here, and we have this big TV in there, and I made a tape of a frame shot of all those guys with spray cans in their hands, and I freeze framed that, and I put little pieces of tape, and on the tape on the screen I wrote their names, like Tre, and I point to this guy with the spray can, and, Billy or what have you, and as soon as I finished doing that, I walked out of the studio, and Billy Joe just drove up in his car, and first thing he goes, "You know who it is? It was Tre. I didn't do it, John." And so I put my arm around him and said, "Billy, either I love you or you're gonna die." And he kind of laughed. He goes, "What do you mean?" And I just walked with them into the studio like this, and I go, "There you are." And I said, "Motherfucker, motherfucker, motherfucker, you guys are dead." And he was like, "Oh shit, I'm busted," right? So he opens up this door right behind me, and this whole room was just a mess. Toilet paper, everything, knives through drum sets and everything like that. Pictures of me saying this is war. I mean, it was a flippin' mess, but I got my revenge. The outside parking lot was a go-kart track. And these things weren't just like little pedal carts. I mean, it was serious. These things, 30, 35 miles an hour in a small parking lot, cone course, 10 carts. I mean, we had people going to the hospital. I was flipped, you know, we had the vice president of Warner Brothers A&R being flipped and almost ran over. I mean, there was no rules out there. In fact, this one point, I said, you know, when you're in the studio, when you're on tour, you're a rock star. When you're on the course, you're a victim. There's no holds barred. You know, they have a lot of fun around it, but if somebody has an idea, get off your fucking cart and get inside and let's do this. It doesn't matter who says that. If somebody says that, they all just run in. They know what's first. They have their priorities.
It just kind of came about of all of us having a good time in the studio. You know, I mean, sometimes you feel like if you're just trying to write songs, single songs, like it becomes like a labor or a labor of love. But this time it was just, you know, it was just inspired. We had a great time.
During one studio game where they had to come up with a 30-second song and link it to the last one, they realized they were writing material unlike any they had come up with before. For starts, the material was inspired by developments in American politics, most notably the rise of right-wing politics led by President George W. Bush, following the events of September 11, 2001.
American Idiot is about basically just feeling disenfranchised from the current of American pop culture and just get sort of bombarded with all this sort of information, but it's sort of useless information at the same time, and you just question where your individuality is, and it just kind of leaves you sort of confused.
I think a lot of artists in the United States right now are kind of afraid to voice their opinions, especially right after 9/11, in fear of not being patriotic. More people are stepping up right now, you know, and I think that's important. And I think it's the most patriotic thing you can do is to voice your opinion, even if it's just saying I'm confused and I'm scared. That's okay.
Well, maybe I'm the faggot America. I'm not a part of a redneck agenda. Now everybody to the propaganda. As I no longer the age of paranoia.
It's like, it's good to hear a band that's offering a rallying call, because it seemed like a lot of bands didn't say very much about the Bush thing. And for a band like Green Day to come out against it, you know what side they're on, but they've never been overtly political, really, massively. To make a record that was a political record, even though it wasn't like a sloganeering political record, it was just a record about being in America, about not being that happy with the situation, but not saying exactly. So it kind of captured all those kind of feelings.
You know, punk rock has a history of being political, with bands like The Clash and the Sex Pistols and that sort of thing, and tweaking society in general, and anti-authoritarian and so on. So yeah, I think they're following in that proud tradition.
I think there's a genuine passion in Billy Joe at that stage to get his teeth into some lyrics, and I think he does a great job of doing that.
American Idiot, man, that was definitely just from the heart. You know, it was, you know, definitely what they were feeling at the time, and you know, it was like they were making something that they were meant to do.
First single, American Idiot, absolutely fantastic. It's one of the top 10 greatest punk singles ever released. It's an amazing record, isn't it? Utterly powerful, lyrically spot on, really, really exciting performance. It's perfect, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with that record at all. There's not one thing you could redo in that record.
I think the experimentation on this record really comes from just taking away all the rules and practicing in the studio. It's about like playing with song structures and trying to make everything maximum Green Day.
I love using harsh words and harsh imagery to sort of get, you know, the feeling across, my point across, because I think deep down people are so censored that that's the actual words that they're thinking.
American Idiot is more of a concept than a kind of rock opera It's operatic in the sense that there's a vague story told through various different movements and suites.
Although the characters do emerge from song to song, the story, such as it is quite hard to follow. This character starts out in the small town and is attracted to the big city. That's Billy Joe's story. Low self-esteem, led astray, subject to the temptations that all young people know about, and ends up in a bad way.
If you listen to American Idiot, they sing about this little small town, Jingle Town. It's a little 5-block radius area. When they mention the warehouse, that's this. When they mention Brad's and Mom's, Brad was my studio manager, you know, and he was mother hen. He'd walk in and say, "What the hell are you guys doing? You can't be writing on goddamn walls." You know, so they felt at peace and at home.
While American Idiot started off as the album that had conceivably been their least successful yet, it instead expanded their fan base as few could ever have predicted. A combination of dissatisfaction with American foreign policies, perfectly executed singles such as the album's title track and Boulevard of Broken Dreams that sounded made for radio, their most explosive live shows yet, and a new, sharper, trimmer look for the band all helped push American Idiot to the charts around the world. To date, it is approaching the 10 million mark.
Boulevard of Broken Dreams. I remember walking into the studio in the morning, and Mike just said, "You got to hear this song." And I think it was Mike and our chief engineer just pulled it up, and they said, "Yeah, we were just working on this last night. Listen to this," you know, and played it for me, and I couldn't get it out of my head. It was awesome.
I think Boulevard of Broken Dreams is it's actually, for me lately, it's felt like the hangover after the election. But it's definitely, I mean, it's got a more melancholy vibe, but it's, you know, I think it's a departure from anything we've ever done musically, but, you know, it's still very much Green Day.
And what next? In the footsteps of rock giants, they are about to embark on their first punk rock opera based on the themes of American Idiot. The true punk messiah himself, Billy Joe, is penning the drafts as we speak, and the band have solidified their reputation as one of the greatest live bands in the world.
American Idiot can probably sustain them for another good decade, and it's obvious by this point that Billy Joe Armstrong is a fantastic songwriter, and he's still a relevant voice in music.
Billy's always right. I mean, you know, if he's playing outside and he gets an idea, he writes on your car. I mean, just so he doesn't forget it. There's always a pen, there's always something, you know. Billy doesn't stop. I'm sure he's writing right now.
I'm really glad that they've become so popular again, the resurgence from American Idiot, but I don't think that, I think they would have just kept going on regardless, as long as they were happy making the music that they're making.
They're in for the long haul. As long as they want to be there, they'll be there, Green Day.
They've been around now for 10, 12, 14 years. So they can keep coming back. So any criticisms about whether they're true punk or not, well, maybe that is kind of true punk. You know, they're still doing what they want to do.